Okay, so it's saying we're live. We're live. This is it. We are 16 seconds on. I'm so excited, guys. You have seen over the past couple of days that I have been sharing with you to lock me in your calendar for 4 o'clock today, because this was not going to be a conversation you wanted to miss. Joining me live is the former CEO of Microsoft Canada, Frank Clegg. He has spent over 20 years in the technology industry and over 10 years fighting for health in the environment for people like you and me. And 7 years ago, Frank founded what's called Canadians for Safe Technology, C4ST, and he's the chairman and CEO of that. And we're going to dive in as to part of Frank's why, and why do we need to be so concerned about technology and our safety. And he's gone from tackling power plants to Wi-Fi radiation, 5G. So Frank, thank you for taking the time today to speak with me and allow everyone to tune in to hear what you have to say. Thanks for joining.
Shae, thanks very much for the invitation.
I thought it would be neat, before we get into 5G and the conversation today, I wanted to share a little bit with people about, how you and I have met. We're both Oakvillians, living in Oakville. And I wanted to share with everybody that I actually, really connected with the work that you're doing back in 2010. For those of you who don't know, the power plant was going to be an issue in Oakville, that they were trying to build a power plant that was close to about 1,000 homes, around a whole bunch of schools. And I remember my dad coming into our house, coming home from work one day and saying, listen, Frank Clegg is championing that we need to shut down the power plant. There's going to be all of these harms and effects that could be detrimental to our health, and we need to stop it. Mm-hmm. And, Frank, my father, and he's a visionary man. And so I said, well, what did you guys come up with? And it's like, well, let's bring Aaron Brockovich to Oakville. Let's bring the community together. Let's bring in the MPs. And we had, I believe it was Kevin Flynn who championed that bill. And that's really how I saw your leadership in this area around our health and environment. Yeah. And what an incredible time. And I'll let you share the success of your work.
Well, as you said, Shae, that was the second largest power plant in Canada, in the most densely populated area. And that was my first time that I had been into any kind of an advocacy work. I've always worried about using technology safely. When I was at Microsoft, we started PINSA, which is a Kids Internet Safety Association, which really helped. There's a dark side to the web, the same as there's the benefits to the web. And we created PINSA to help track pedophiles who are using the internet to actually lure children. So that was my first foray into doing anything beyond straight technology work. And then when we got involved in this power plant, the more we found out about it, the more we found out how harmful it was. So we rallied the local community. We put together a board of people, got business leaders like your dad involved. And certainly the Aaron Brockovich event was a key turning point in the whole thing. And we were successful in getting the power plant canceled, but actually moved to an area a rural area where there was a lot less of an impact on people in the immediate area. So we felt comfortable with that win. It was the right thing to do. There were estimates that several hundred people a year would be seriously ill from the toxins coming from the power plant. If anybody had told me my next phase of my career would be involved in community advocacy and engagement, I would have wondered if they were, smoking something healthy. But, that's where we are. And we ended up, and then it was a natural progression moving from, the power plant. We got known in the community, and then we had people come up to us and start asking questions about cell towers and Wi-Fi in schools and smart meters. So that's when we created C4ST soon after the power plant battle was over, to help educate people and raise awareness about the potential harm from wireless devices and how to use them more safely.
Yeah. So, and Frank, we successfully, obviously, we did not have the power plant come to Canada or come to Oakville. And that was in 2010, which you know that today I have a nonprofit organization that fights human trafficking here in Canada and abroad. But 2010 was the year that we actually founded Freedom, and we're 10 years strong now today. But it was so interesting for me as a younger person, I was 25 at the time, seeing somebody like yourself who was really stepping out as a leader, and you didn't have to do that. You know, you did not, you were retired, you could have kept playing golf, you could go on these trips, and yet, you know, I watched you be this voice for people who were either being silenced or who were not aware as to what was going on. And I know it really probably helped to even encourage me, because I was just starting out with Freedom then, and seeing how getting the MPs involved, and Kevin Flynn actually became a really big supporter of Freedom in the earlier years. And you know, so people always say to even myself, as I'm sure you get, and this is what I want to ask you, is that both you and I, very different careers, we didn't need to do what we did in starting organizations, these initiatives, these movements. And it comes down to what is your why? Because you have so much passion behind it. You've been doing this for years. What's the purpose for you in doing this? Why is it so important?
Well, the power plant lesson taught us a couple of things. Not only myself, but my wife and our daughters as well. Is the first thing that, you know, a lot of people who are in government have the best intentions, but sometimes they get caught up in the politics, or they get caught up in the decision that's been made by another agency, or in this case, a minister who had made a declaration that just shouldn't have been followed. And the second big learning was that you can make a difference. You know, when we started that power plant battle, there were everybody we talked to, industry liaisons, government lobbyists, other politicians said, but you have no chance of getting that power plant turned around, because the contract had already been signed and implementation was started. So what we learned was, first of all, government isn't always right, even though the people in government, in majority, try to do the right thing. And secondly, you can change the mind, and you can stop things that shouldn't be done. And so, you know, the issue in the power plant was huge for the community of Oakville. This whole 5G and wireless communications and wireless technology, you know, it's got global implications, and it's a global initiative. It's a federal government. The federal government is a lot more challenging to reach out to and to connect with. But at the same time, you know, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, it's up to people to make up the people who we elect. The beauty of democracy is you get to elect people and you get to unelect people. So if they're doing what you want as an elected official, if you let them know that, they will listen to you. But if they don't know that you're concerned about something, then they're not going to act on it. So those, to me, and you know, you can only spend so much time on a golf course. You can spend so much time in another country, and it's all exciting and it's, you know, fascinating. But I will tell you, the benefit and the rush from protecting the community is like nothing I'd ever experienced. It's an amazing feeling to know that you caused the government to redo a decision that they shouldn't have made, to admit that they made a mistake, and then to go and fix it. So I think, you know, I feel blessed. I had an amazing career, had a lot of fun. Learned a lot, have a fair amount of resources available to us. And now we get a chance to give back to the community. And I think that's, you know, as I say, if that's the second chapter of my life, then that's a fun thing. And my, you know, family's involved, and, you know, it rewards all of us.
Big time. Well, we're so grateful for the work that you do. And for anybody who has not seen the work that you have done and they're learning about this today, I think that they will very much agree and appreciate. And as you know, it's an upward hill battle. Like it's not an easy feat. There's no glory in it. You know, you're not doing it for the fame or to get a pat on the back. And so I think we're in such an interesting time right now. We're at a crossroad, really, in history, and I think we've seen this shift. I mean, you would know much more than me, coming even from Microsoft, where this emergence of the internet and what is that to computers, to, Bill Gates having a vision of having one of these mini boxes that we're looking at right now on in every home. And then it migrated to the cell phone. And at one point, technology was really a luxury, right? Like if you had a computer in your home, if you had a smartphone, it was a luxury. And now it's a necessity that whether you're in a developing or a third world country, most people have a smartphone and or a tablet and laptop and another tablet because the new tablet came out, or iPad, or what have you, right? Yeah. And tech is great when it's good. And when it's not, we all say it's horrible, right? Like we've all had these times where we're trying to like get on live and it's like not working, or like, even we'll give you guys some insider information this morning. Frank meant to send me an email back and the button didn't press send. And I was like, oh my goodness, did he get my email? So like, we love it when it works for us. And when it doesn't, it can be this horrible thing. And when you think about Wi-Fi now too, it's like everywhere. You've got all of these hot spots in parks, in libraries. It's very accessible. It's such a prevalent form of our technology today. Yeah. And I want you to share with us, like, one of my first kind of questions is, what is really the difference between Wi-Fi? Is there a difference? Is it the same between 4G or 5G? And there's so much stuff that comes out from Health Canada, which I'm going to ask you to speak to as well, where they are saying that we really have nothing to be concerned about, that Wi-Fi, it's safe, or maybe it is safe, So let's kind of start there. What's the difference, and take it away.
So I don't want to turn this into a science lesson because everybody will click the button to end us. We're talking about the radio spectrum. And if you think back to your early science days, we talked about the radio waves that we use on the big, TV and radio towers, right up through to the early days of X-ray radiation. And so all of those spectrum, think of each of those pieces of that spectrum as bands for information. And so what the government has done is just really basically kind of chop them into different pieces. And what the industry has done to make things easy is to say, okay, so there's a 4G, which is the last generation, and 4G stands for generation, not to be confused with 5G, which is a Wi-Fi gigahertz, right? So all the difference between Wi-Fi and 4G and 5G, they're just in different bands of these frequencies that are used to communicate information through radio waves. 5G is the most recent. It's fifth generation technology. It will not replace fourth generation. It will actually take advantage of the 4G infrastructure and then add some different kind of antennas and other technology on top of what's already out there on cell towers and on lamp posts and things like that. So without getting into the whole electromagnetic spectrum, which I don't think anybody really wants to hear about, they're all very similar. They're using different frequencies, but the fundamental concepts are the same. Think of it as a radio wave that has information attached to it that is sent from a cell phone or a tablet through to a receiving device, whether it's a router in the home or a cell tower antenna that's some ways away. And then that information is sent back through to the internet, to the sources or the destination points.
And so even as I'm hearing you saying, like, sending the information, transmitting, to the different points, is this safe for us? Is that technology safe?
I do not think it is safe at all. The challenge that we have is that the technology is tested, and there's a whole debate. There's just something came up my screen. I'm sorry about that. Anyways, so the technology, there are hundreds and hundreds of peer-reviewed published papers that show harm to the human body from these radio frequencies. And these studies are in peer-reviewed journals that we would recognize the names. Are done by international scientists of great repute. Some of them have been doing research on radio frequency radiation for decades. The largest group is a group called the EMRscientist.org. It's a group of over 250 scientists from 40 countries around the world who signed a formal appeal to the United Nations and the World Health Organization, expressing their concern over wireless radiation in general. So that whole radio frequency radiation, we're talking about the 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5G, but especially concerned about the impacts of 5G because there's no research on it at all in terms of showing it's safe. And so they're concerned about the impact on human health. Shae, one of the things that happens is that a lot of the exposures we're getting now, you're exposed to them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And, when the industry nobody's doing a scientific experiment to show what it's like to be bombarded continuously. We do know that it impacts at the DNA level. There is DNA damage. We know there's sperm damage. There are now irrefutable links to cancer in lab rats. There's epidemiological studies now out of Sweden that show that there's a connection to cancer and exposure to this RF radiation, whether it's cell phone or Wi-Fi radiation. Other neurodegenerative issues, so down at the cells, at the body, sperm damage, other reproductive issues. So we have the science to show, and I say peer-reviewed, published, I'll keep saying that, by experts around the world to show these links to the radiation that we use every day, whether it's in our cell phone or our Wi-Fi systems, to show the links to this damage to the human body and to this RF frequency radiation.
It's wild. And I mean, you just went off of a list that I know is right here in the top of your mind, of your head, that I can only imagine if we were to open up some of these studies that you're referring to, how much longer the list goes on as to these effects. And so it blows my mind as to how Health Canada has said that they've determined that Wi-Fi poses little risk to those that are exposed to it. Yeah. And how are they able to do that if, as you just mentioned, there's no studies that have been done to show the safety of it, but there's all of these reviews and journal studies to show the complete opposite.
Yeah.
How do they get away with that?
Well, if you read through it, and the FCC and Health Canada, they use the same terminology. They use terms like no established health effects. Mm-hmm. So that's a very, very particular scientific term to say, and it's kind of a chicken and egg. So let me back up. Health Canada and the FCC, so both Canada and the US, are stuck in the 1920 science that say it's if an electron does not heat. In other words, if the human body doesn't get heated from exposure to the RF radiation, then it can't cause harm. That has been debunked now categorically for sure. We're seeing damage to human cells in the body without the tissue being heated. But Health Canada says, well, because there's no established health effects, therefore there's no harm. But when they do the evaluation of the science, they only look at studies that show heating of the tissue. So it's kind of like this catch-22 where they're only accepting science that shows heating, but they won't break their 1920s assumptions that it has to heat to harm. So therefore they get to say, well, there's no established proof or no established evidence.
Right.
My concern is that Health Canada, in my opinion, is looking for every excuse to not open up the safety guidelines and make them more protective, and is looking at every reason they can to say they don't need to change it, as opposed to doing what scientific work should be, to say, look, there is enough scientific evidence now. We should be opening up this investigation. We should be using these international experts and truly doing an evaluation of the science to make sure that our guidelines are safe. And we are convinced that if Health Canada did a proper review of the scientific evidence, they would come out with a category and safety guidelines that are a lot more stringent than what we live with today. An interesting comment for your audience: just have your audience go to Health Canada's website and search on BPA.
BPA, yeah, right. Yep.
Right. I'm not aware of a mom, dad, grandparent, aunt, uncle who will give a child a bottle of BPA. Health
Right.
Canada states, I don't have the right wording, but they say there's not enough elements of BPA to cause harm to children or infants, right? This is also the same agency that took over 30 years to do anything about cigarette smoke. So we had peer-reviewed published papers, and it took them 3 decades. It also took almost as long for them to react to asbestos. So the fact that they're late to the party on this one,
Yeah.
it shouldn't be a surprise. It is concerning. You talked about, the use of cell phones and all that. I read a report that there are now more cell phones in the world than there are toilets.
Wow. More than toilets, my
But just to
goodness.
give you an idea of the penetration. So our concern is if we are a decade or two late in bringing down the safety guidelines that we need for radio frequency radiation technology, then we will be in really bad shape because of the amount of how pervasive the technology is and how many people are using it and how often we're using it.
Yeah. And I mean, so Frank, you might not know this about me, but I am the essential oil queen. I have all chemical-free products in my house. I have like beside me here, these are all my essential oils that I cook with. And then on my other side behind me, I have some. Over here I do. And so all of my stuff in my cabinet as well is all BPA free. I actually prefer glass. So that's, my first choice.
Yeah.
And I don't disagree with you that there's this almost like they just don't care to have to look into new science and to look into the new evidence. And we've seen this time and time again in history where science is always evolving, right? Like what we know now, we didn't know 30 years ago and 50 years ago. And so it's so important for Health Canada, the CDC to continue to always be evolving in this. Yeah. And, is it part of is it money that it comes down to that they're so de-incentivized to actually open this back up? Our health and safety should be their number one concern. And when you come up against so much backlash and pushback, you have to kind of wonder, what would be a reason for that?
It's hard to speculate. We did meet. We've met with 4 director generals. So this is the top senior government employee who's responsible for the RF radiation file. So that whole department. Mm-hmm. And one of them admitted to us he doesn't have the budget to do this. Health Canada doesn't even have the software tools to evaluate the scientific evidence properly. So when he said that to us, I was astounded. I said, well, shouldn't you be going back to the minister and saying, I don't have the tools? And he said, no, we just do the best we can. So we're going to talk about this at the end. Until Canadians and Americans or whatever country you're in, make this an issue to your elected officials, it's not going to make the top of the priority list. Government is no different than a business. There are way more things that you want to get done and you need to do than you have the resources to deploy to do it, right? Yeah. So our job and the opportunity that we have is to send a message to our, in Canada it's a member of parliament, a federal member of parliament. In the US it's congressmen and senators. Let those elected officials know that this is important and they need to make time and allocate resources and spend energy and money to go and evaluate this technology and the science properly. And until we do that, it will never bubble up to the top of the list. So, the power plant, we scared the heck out of a lot of local politicians, to be blunt. They felt they weren't going to get reelected. Well, that's the MO. It isn't, I know it sounds very basic, but it really is pretty basic on what we have to do and what needs to be done.
Well, and this is why you're doing this. And even with Freedom, the biggest thing is making people aware. I always say you can't fight something you're not aware exists.
No, exactly.
So if you don't know about the problem, how can you participate to be a part of the solution? Yeah. And, and I'm going to come back to this in a little bit, but, you've just brought it up, the importance of never underestimating the power that one person's voice have. And when we, being Canadian as well, living in one of the most free nations on the planet, it is such a privilege to be able to exercise your voice. Yeah. And, the more of us that if we all each have that same mindset of saying, yeah, I'm going to make one phone call to my MP. I'm going to write one letter to my MP and my MPP and even the counselor in whatever city you're in. If we all decide to do that, that's where you change a nation. That's where you change history, right? Like the collective coming together. It's how we shut down the power plant in Oakville. And it starts with one. And so, you're absolutely right. And when you think of like the rollouts that are happening, and I still don't think so many Canadians and just people around the world understand the precautions, like what should we be careful about when these towers are going up? And I'm actually going to ask you even, what does a 5G tower look like? Like maybe we're driving by them, and I've been told that they're along the QEW now from Toronto all the way to Hamilton. And I'm driving and I'm trying to look, and I'm like, I got to talk to Frank Clegg. I'm like, I don't know. What's it look like?
Well, if you just Google, and so let me a little bit of a background. The antenna, the antenna is a little box that sits on the tower. So when you're driving down the QE or any highway, or sometimes in residential areas now, if you look at these towers, you will see different shapes. Sometimes they're the big cylindrical; they look like a small satellite dish, right? The small cell antennas are the ones that we're talking about with 5G, and the ones we're very concerned about are about the size of a shoebox. Right? So think of a pair of shoes, look at it, and they look like a shoebox. They're square. You don't see any antennas or anything coming. Think of that as a small cell antenna. The concern about 5G is that because the technology can handle more information. So in other words, think of the pipe of information being bigger. But because it can handle more information, the antennas need to be closer to where the information is coming from. We are starting to see these small cell antennas as close as 20 meters to children's bedrooms in residential areas.
Wild.
And the rule of thumb, what we're saying to people is any streetlight post, any telephone pole, or any hydro pole in your community is a candidate to have a small cell antenna put on it. Now, what the industry is doing, the telecommunications industry is doing, is rapidly rolling out. And most the small cell antennas you're seeing now, and the small cell boxes are mostly 4G because the 5G technology isn't flushed out yet. But once they have them installed, they can come out and then just do some minor technical changes to convert it to a 5G antenna. So as you're driving along and you're seeing these shoebox-sized antennas, those are most likely 4G antennas that can become 5G antennas very, very quickly and very, very easily. And so as I say, that's a concern, and we're seeing models where, in order to meet the demand, the projected demand, it could be every 100 meters in a subdivision you will see one of these small cell antennas. And we also like to point out is then that's just for one carrier. So if you have 5 or 6 carriers in your area, you could end up with 5 or 6 of these small cell antennas radiating energy 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to your home or your school or your office. And you could have multiple of them depending on who's servicing that area where you live, work, or your children go to school.
That's wild. Yeah, I didn't even think about that. Of course, like for each provider, they've got to have their own towers.
Yes. No, Industry Canada wants the providers to share. We have seen some sharing on antennas themselves, like on the towers. I'm not aware of any instance in Canada where they've actually tried to share frequencies or share the antennas themselves. So we think there's about 180,000 cell tower antennas across the country. There will be at least another 180,000 in order to meet the demands of the 5G consumer demands for this data streaming and all the things that are projected.
So when you say like 180,000 across Canada, is there like a map or can we somehow see where all of these towers are located?
Yeah, there is. I won't read the name of the map because it's very complicated. Maybe we can put it on at the end. I'll send it to you. You can add it on. But what I did was I just Googled small cell antennas in Canada. Okay. And one of the sites came up, and it actually was pretty good. I wrote the general site down. ertyu.org. I don't know if that, I can send you the better, because it's called ertyu.org. It's a fellow who's, I think he's just voluntarily doing that. So I don't know how accurate the data is. I checked out our local one and they look pretty accurate, but this is not an endorsement of that site. It's just more to say, if you're curious, that would be a place to look.
Right. And so when you think of like the word safe distance, is there such thing as safe distance with a 5G, or right now even with like the 4G towers?
Shae, that's a very hard one, because in addition to the frequency that we talked about, there's also the power. And so at what magnitude or what amount of power. And so you could actually be in a cell tower and be, say, 500 meters away from it and be safer than the radiation coming from a tower that's, say, a kilometer away, because of the power of that cell tower. And so I don't think there's a distance, and that's why we're working so hard to try to get Health Canada to change the guidelines. The guidelines are under something called Safety Code 6, which was updated. It says 2015, even though the science that Health Canada used was dated 2011. That's when the science ended. So we've now got safety guidelines that are 9 years out of date with the science. And so a lot of our focus has been on Health Canada to update the safety guidelines. So no matter how close or far away you are from the emitting device, you know if it's meeting these guidelines that are hopefully better and protecting us better, then you don't have to worry about distance. But I also wouldn't, people ask me all the time, well, should I move out to the country and it might be safe? Well, yes, but then somebody could put a huge tower, on the property next door to you. So, the trying to move or being protected, if you are very worried about it, there are organizations that actually have meters and evaluate, or you can even go buy a meter. Safe Living Technologies is a company that we work with that will sell a meter, or maybe get together with a group of friends and buy one to start metering if you're really, really worried about it. Our effort, P4T, we don't sell any of the meters. We're not involved in any of the metering. Our focus has been really, as I said, educating people on how to use the technology and advocating to government on how to use technology more safely.
Right. So are there any symptoms that we could detect in the body? Like, obviously, some of the things that you'd mentioned where it leads to cancer, yes, that could develop, down the road. But is there any kind of immediate symptoms that you could maybe detect that, I don't know if the term would be almost like wireless radiation poisoning? Like, you tell me what the right term is for that, but.
Well, there's the challenge in defining this is that sometimes people are impacted in different ways. So, for example, some people will get really severe headaches. Some people will get disoriented. Some people will get tinnitus, ringing of the ears. Some people get heart palpitations. Some people will feel actually a tightening of the chest where they have the inability to breathe.
Right.
It's interesting during the COVID crisis, there's an opportunity because people are staying at home. So what I would recommend that people do, if you're not sure, is to try to, assuming you don't have a cell tower antenna nearby, is go through a 24-hour period and turn off all the technology in your house.
This is a challenge.
All the wireless technology in your house, right? So your cell phones, your router, unplug it. And any device that you think radiates that you use to communicate, and then see what the symptoms are. Now, in some cases, it might take longer than 24 hours, but if you're worried, so because that's what we say to people, if you think you're being exposed and you think you're reacting, then try to get yourself to a safe place for an extended period of time. And it might take a couple of days. It might take longer, depending on how sensitive you are, and see and then maybe slowly turn the devices back on. There is a term called electro-hypersensitivity, EHS. There's a couple of groups in Canada that focus on individuals who are electrosensitive. Now, these are people who are extremely, they may get so debilitated that they actually cannot work. Our concern is that may, and the most conservative estimate is 3% of the population, which would be 1 million Canadians, up to 10 or even 15% of the population, which could be 3.5 to 5 million Canadians.
Right.
But nobody's diagnosing that. Our Canadian Medical Association has no tools for doctors to do that. So we're in this very hard situation where the medical community, this is before COVID. Now, after COVID, there's a whole different stressors and different things that we have to do to get the medical community up to date. But there's going to be people that are going to come forward that may have electrosensitivities that we're misdiagnosing. Kids in school that are, reacting to Wi-Fi now that most schools, certainly in Ontario and a lot of other provinces, are just blanketing the school with Wi-Fi. We're getting children who are, in my opinion, being misdiagnosed and being put on medication where it's actually the Wi-Fi in their school that may be harming them. So it's a hard topic. It's a hard topic. It's a very complicated topic. It takes people a lot of work to figure it out. But people who, I get emails all the time from people who have done that self-diagnosis. They've turned off the technology, so they're very, very sure that it is the technology. But then what can they do, right? They try to isolate themselves, but if their neighbor turns the Wi-Fi on, if they're in a condo and their neighbors on either side or the units above or below and all have Wi-Fi, they're being exposed. So it's a tough situation for people who are showing any sensitivities to the radio frequency radiation.
Absolutely. Well, and today we live in such an era that like our phones, like my phone's right here, it's like always within, closer than an arm's reach, and people put them in the back of their pockets. The girls have the Lululemons now where you have it in the side of your thigh. How many of us go to bed with like our phone right beside our bed? And I feel maybe a little proud that you'll appreciate this, but a new habit of mine, probably about 2 months ago, I have started to leave my phone in the kitchen. It does not come in my bedroom. I also have different settings on it. So at nighttime, when I should be kind of winding down my brain, to dim my screen as well, just from like those effects. But I actually have an alarm clock now that simulates the sun. And so I've got a sunset, sunrise, so that's now what I wake up to. And, I turn off my Wi-Fi at nighttime and I leave it on my kitchen counter because it's just time where I'm not going to be up. So why have that radiation? This is just the little that I've started to learn and know. And so I think just even these small little steps that individuals can do, and being cautious about your phone in your purse instead of maybe in your back pocket or putting it inside your thigh, right? We just don't think about how much it affects us. And I also suffer from migraines, and sometimes I will like wake up and I just like, they're pounding for days on end. And that's what it started me thinking about this device. Like maybe it's because it's so close to where I'm sleeping that these are triggering some of these effects in the body. And I've not been piecing that together. Right. So,
well, what we do tell people is to do what you're doing. There's two fundamental steps. The first one is distance is your friend. So the further you can keep the technology away from your body, the safer it is. And the radiation goes down with the square of the distance. So in other words, if you double the distance between yourself and the device, the radiation goes down by a factor of 4. If you triple the distance, the radiation goes down by a factor of 9. The second thing, so yes, in your pocket, and keep it out of your jacket pocket if you're a guy, or your shirt pocket. We're seeing young women are putting it in their bras. We're starting to see case studies now of reports of women getting breast cancer, young women getting breast cancer. And the expert that I heard talk about it, she made the statement that breast cancer is not a young woman's disease. So that's what triggered her to start looking at young women care and why were they getting this, and it was tracing it back to sticking it in their bras when they're running or stuff like that. So first, distance is your friend. Second thing is treat where you live as your safe haven. So do everything you can when you walk into your home environment, reduce the amount of radiation that you possibly can. So these, a lot of people don't have landline phones anymore. We used to have the mobile phones. Throw that thing out. As you say, take your if you can't turn your router off, then go down to Canadian Tire and buy a timer that you put on your lights in the holiday season, and have that go off at 11 or 12 or 10 o'clock at night, and automatically go off. right?
That's a great tip.
Right.
Yes.
And so, there's things that you can do. Don't sleep with the device in your bedroom. Have the device as you've done, get it out of your bedroom and buy a watch or buy an alarm clock. Wearable devices,
Yeah.
I'm not a fan at all. Again, it's emitting radiation. It's right, on your body.
Yeah.
CBC Marketplace did a program, Wendy Mesley, and she went down to California. They had passed some legislation inside your cell phone. And if you have an iPhone, you have to go to like settings, about, general, legal, and you go 6 layers down, and it tells you there's a minimum distance. You have to hold that phone, whether it's a Samsung or an iPhone or any other kind of phone, up. There's a distance. Otherwise, it breaks the safety guidelines, whether they're FCC or Safety Code 6 guidelines. So Wendy Mesley and CBC went out and bought 3 phones. They went to an organization that measures the phone radiation on behalf of industry. And they found that if you held it to the distance, it passed the regulations. If you held it against the body, where everybody takes their cell phone, all 3 phones broke the safety guidelines for North America.
Wow. Wow.
Broke them, just shattered them. So, part of the education is to say, not only do you need to keep it away from your body to use it safely, you need to even though we think the guidelines are out of date, the guidelines are being broken by holding it to your body. So the 2 things: safety, distance is your friend, and your home is your safe haven. And do whatever you can to protect yourself there.
Which are 2 fabulous tips, and it kind of leads in in as much as like, we don't want to say, we've refrained from using the term social distancing. I think that does a lot to the psyche in this period we're in, but in physical distancing, so physical distance with your device as well. So that's a great tip. And I want to ask you, Frank, there's, a lot of people that are questioning, is there the theories around 5G, does it relate to COVID? Is 5G possibly, we've seen, like, is there anything linking in there that we need to be worried about?
No, there's the science is a beautiful discipline. And what scientists do is they debate a theory. There has been a theory projected that says, is there a connection between 5G and the geography places around the world and COVID? There is no evidence. There's no proof. C4ST does not support that in one bit. I think there's a lot of work that has to be done. There's a potential theory, maybe, but before we can come out and declare that, there has to be a lot of scientific work before we can do it. And so, we don't support that. If it does become a theory and it's proven with all the peer-reviewed, published material that's required, then we will be the first to communicate it. But right now, it's a lot of smart scientists looking at data, saying, I wonder, but we've got a long way to go before we can make in my opinion, any kind of connection between those two events.
Well, I'll keep following it, and if that does change, I'll be calling you first to bring you back onto the conversation.
Hopefully we'll be letting you know.
Yes, yeah, fair enough. Yes, hopefully you will, as I know you will. You're a great leader in this whole realm. So, can I ask you one more question around? Is there any studies done that you can either share with me after that I could link up around, many of us carry around toxins in our body that we don't realize, whether it's, traces of mercury, aluminum, different metals and toxins. Is there any effect that a person who has higher level of toxicity in their body might be more affected by 5G and radiation?
There is actually a study that showed people that had higher amounts of lead in their system were actually more likely to get harm to their body from exposure to RF radiation. So I will send you the link to that study. You can put it up there. It's part of a larger paper that we actually had published in the Building Environment magazine and through Elsevier Publications on about how to create safe and healthy buildings. And so in that we talked about this one area that talked about a connection between some toxins and actually RF radiation. So I will send that to you, and you can put that up on your site.
Thank you. And I mean, for those of you guys watching who know me well, I will continue to do my research on that and just share more. So I appreciate, Frank, you just sharing that with us. Kind of the last big question before I want to get into some of the other action points that people can do. I know we've shared with them along the way. What liabilities do telecom companies have to basically give us as a consumer the assurity that they have our safety best at heart? You know, what is the liability? Are they at risk? Do they have things maybe called immunity? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't think I'm going to make you feel more comfortable with my answer.
Okay.
There are two of the largest reinsurers in the world. So these are companies that would apply and actually help insurance companies or organizations get insurance through other networks, right? Two of the largest are Swiss Re and Lloyd's of London, two based in Europe. And both of them have come out with position papers where they will not be involved and not provide reinsurance for RF radiation and cell companies. So the answer is, what's happening is the cell phone companies are now having to insure themselves and take the liability and the risk themselves.
Okay. And they're doing that?
Pardon me?
And they are doing that? They're taking on the liability?
They have to, because they can't get reinsured.
Wow.
So they're self-insuring. I'm sure there's a whole business case on how they can do that. But when you see Lloyd's and Swiss Re come out with white papers that talk about the risk and saying they're not going to do that, and that should tell you that they've done their analysis and saying it's a difficult time. So that's where they are. And so, you know, there are a couple of lawsuits that are underway in the U.S. that are just starting the process. There's a group of about, I think there's 10 or 12 people who have developed brain cancer. They feel that brain cancer was caused by, you know, holding the phone to their heads for long periods of time. And they've got a group together that are actually suing the industry, and I believe they're suing the FCC as well, or the government, on that. I'm not aware of any actions in Canada. There's a lot of discussion about potential lawsuits in Canada. I'm not aware of any that have actually started to sue for damages from radiation from cell towers or cell phones or other wireless devices.
Yeah, it's crazy, because it always makes you think that if you're not willing to insure something, to insure the consumer, like, what aren't you telling us? Because if you were confident in your product, and obviously things happen, right, in any industry, like, you know, you're going to make mistakes or you're going to have issues, but to go as far to say we absolutely will not guarantee safety, we absolutely will not be liable for whatever happens to you in using our product, you know, that should be really alarming for people. Like,
well, what you will hear the telecommunication companies say, and they're very precise in their wording. What they do not say their products are safe. What they say, and I've seen them say this to the Parliamentary Health Committee. I've seen them say it to, you know, the Oakville Town Council. The statement that is made is our products meet federal guidelines if used correctly. Period. There is no discussion, no inference, nothing other than we meet the guidelines. And they've only added the part about if used correctly when they're starting to understand that people are not using the products correctly. They're holding them to their heads. So technically my industry, and I say my industry, I've spent, you know, I'm in my 4.5 decade now in the technology sector. So what my industry is protected, because they have these warnings, either they're, you know, 4 or 5 layers down in your cell phone, or they're on page 162 and fine print in the manual that say you need to keep this, you know, certain distance. Cell phones, it could be anywhere from 1/2 an inch to an inch. Baby monitors, it's like 8 inches or so. I should be using metric when I'm old fashioned. You know, so every device has a distance warning because it's a personal device that you use. So look, my industry is technically, arguably safe from any litigation because they have that warning there, I would argue. And that's the other thing the CBC Marketplace program showed, was that 80% of people were not aware of the warning, and 60% admitted to holding the device to their head. So nobody, you know, the last thing you read is the manual when you get it with a new device. The last thing, right? The only time you read it is a problem, right?
Yeah.
So the industry's not saying they're safe. What my industry's saying is we need federal guidelines.
Right. So that kind of like brings me into the action point. You know, we've gone over a bit on what people can do in their home to take action steps. But as we started out at the beginning, you and I both know that in order to make any amount of change in our country means we need to change legislation.
Yeah.
So talk to us. I know you have a petition happening. This is a great action point that people can be doing. I'm going to put it up on the screen so people can jot it down. But just share with us, what is this petition and what is it aiming to do?
Well, we're calling it an appeal as opposed to just more than a petition, and that's okay. It's a fine point, and there are several things that we're asking the government to do. So, in a nutshell, the two core pieces of the appeal are for the government to accelerate the use of fiber. So we're not saying that we don't agree that there's tremendous benefit from the technology. What we're saying is that a lot of the applications that people are using wireless technology for can be done through fiber optic networks and wired connections. And so we want the government to understand that and invest and accelerate that use of the fiber through a lot of these applications and a lot of this infrastructure, as opposed to everything default to smart wireless devices. The second piece, as we talked about before, Health Canada Safety Code 6 guideline is pathetically out of date. It was first devised in the 1970s. It hasn't been revised. It had any major revisions. There's been a little tuning and tweaking, but nothing major since then. So it was defined. Those guidelines were defined 30 years before the first smartphone was launched to the marketplace, before we even knew about Wi-Fi. So, and I mentioned the 250 scientists from 40 countries. They, as a group, have published 2,000 papers, peer-reviewed published papers, on the harm from RF radiation on people and birds in the environment. So there's the scientists out there. So that's the core. And then what we're asking the government to do, and it's a fairly bold move, is to stop the deployment of any new small cell antennas until the government has updated its safety guidelines and until there's been a full economic review of the potential harm from 5G versus the benefit. Like, we keep hearing about all the benefits of 5G, and one estimate had there's $11 trillion in benefits from 5G. But nobody's balancing that against healthcare costs, lost productivity from health effects. We know privacy and security will be significantly more at risk in a 5G wireless environment because there's more data out there that can be hacked. Right. We're hearing, we know, or the IEEE has published a document that talks about wireless technology continuing to need 10 times more energy than wired technology. So what are the ramifications on climate change for that? We're starting to see these data centers, and projections are that the communications sector will start to soon take over the energy requirements of potentially the transportation sector if you project out into the future. So we're asking for the government to stop the deployment, stop auctioning and getting more money from 5G and 6G technologies until you fix Safety Code 6 and you understand all the economic benefits versus the harm. And so that's really what the appeal is. You can see where the appeal is. We have, I encourage people to get educated on this topic. I think it can be complicated, but it isn't as complicated as my industry tries to make it, to be blunt. Like, it's very straightforward. It hurts people. Legislation needs to be updated. The guidelines need to be updated. The appeal, we have 57 references on the appeal document. It may sound like a lot. Well, just go through and read them and see that there are, we try to, when we talk about sperm damage, we have references. When we talk about DNA damage, when we talk about learning deficits, learning disorders, when we talk about the impact on children, we reference all of these statements that we're making in the appeal before we actually signed our names to it. I'm proud there are 24 organizations that were part of the appeal before we launched it. It's a very interesting process to go through and get multiple people to approve one document. But for the first time that I'm aware of in this issue, we have one document where organizations and groups from across the country, so from Halifax through to BC, strong group in Quebec, very good presence in Ontario, out in the West in BC. And we were all signed up to this one document saying, okay, here's the backing of why. These are all the statements on what we're basing this appeal on. And here are the specific things we're asking the government to do.
So, I mean, guys, you've heard it. There is so much information that is on Frank's website. Make sure you go. Please sign this appeal. It's so important. It's going to support the work that Frank and all of these organizations are doing. And in the end, he's doing it for us. He's doing it for you and me to keep us healthy, keep us strong. And if you want to learn more about this, timing could not have been better, because at the beginning of June, for 5 days, there's a free online summit. And I actually just found out about it a couple of days ago, and I was like, this is amazing. I'm coming on to talk to Frank. Like, this is perfect timing. So there's nobody who can explain it better than yourself, Frank. Maybe if you want to just share, it's this free online summit. It's called, if you go to www.the5gsummit.com, you can register for free. And you were telling me about some of the incredible speakers. Do you want to just maybe share a bit to what that's going to be like?
Yeah, they're all world-class speakers, Shae. In fact, I've had the privilege of probably meeting up to a third of the people in one-on-one discussions. As I got into this topic, 7 years ago, I did my own research, quite frankly. So I had the resources to go to sessions in San Francisco, people from Harvard, World Health Organization advisors. So this is a top-level tiered group of people who have been, a lot of them have been doing research in this field for, as I said before, for decades. So these are the people that are, some of them are involved in fighting cigarette smoke. One of them is, I think she's on the agenda. In fact, I'm pretty sure she is. She was one of the scientific writers for Al Gore's team that won the Nobel Peace Prize.
Wow.
So that's the caliber. So they're high caliber. It's a long summit. I'm not sure you want to sit for 5 days, but you can pick the areas that you want to watch. I've got a copy of the book where there's a text that came out of the last summit, and I think Josh, the Canadian, by the way, who's running it.
Cool.
He moved down to, I think he's in LA now. But anyways, I have the documents, and so I have all the text. I've been reading through all the presentations. So I'd say, yeah, for sure, spend your time on it. I want to go back to the appeal and ask people to do one other thing. When they sign the appeal document, check the box that says there's going to be a letter sent to your MP saying you've sent the appeal. Because as I talked about before, if your MPs aren't aware that this is an issue to you, they're going to prioritize it down lower on the list, and they're not going to do anything about it. And if you really want to get engaged, on our website, we're recruiting for people called writing representatives. And that's somebody who can act as a liaison between C4SP and your local member of parliament. And we will give you the tools. We have weekly conference calls. So we're not going to just have you go in and meet your MP. We're going to have you go in, and in some cases I've actually called in on the phone while the local constituent has met with their MP.
That's awesome.
Those have been interesting discussions, and the MPs are going to prioritize people in their riding. So that's why you need a riding representative. So there's a button on our webpage under 5G appeal where you can just, and you're not signing up right away. You're just saying, hey, can you tell me more? Right. And Wendy, one of our volunteers, she runs the riding rep program. So Wendy is very good. She's been doing this for 4 years now, and she's helped people walk through. And we've got different people are more comfortable doing different things. So make sure you let your MP know, and if you're interested, sign on, or just get a local group together. And go in on your own and meet your MP and just say, look, I'm worried about this. What are you doing about it, Mr. or Ms. MP, to protect myself and my family, because I'm really worried that 5G is only going to get worse.
Yep, absolutely. And for those Canadians that maybe you've never reached out to anybody in government, by law, they have to respond to you. So this is such a fantastic thing that if you send an email, if you call, email is always the best because it's in writing, you have record of it. So this is why, Frank has said it's so easy. You can check off that box, guys. It'll send it for you. This isn't you needing to be like, what do I say to my MP? Frank and his team have already done that work for you. So you check off that box, it goes, and by law, you will hear from the MP, MPP, your counselor. And so this is, again, where when we realize the power of our voice and utilizing that. And if we all decide today, whoever is watching, if we all decide today to just go on to Frank's website, check the box, send it to our MP, this is where that ripple effect takes place. Yeah. And we start to see change actually happening in our country. And so, Frank, I can't thank you so much for your time, for joining me today. I know that I'm probably going to be sending you an email in a few months to say, we got to have you back. We've got more questions about 5G, keeping us updated on what we can continue to do. I think I should probably set up a phone call with you with one of my MPs as well. I would love to do that. Right. But this is just so important, and needing to take care of our health and really understanding what is coming into play around our world, because it's not just another tower, as you very clearly outlined for us. So I thank you again for joining me today.
Okay, well, thank you for the invitation, and I hope I was helpful and provided some information to everybody listening.
Absolutely, you were. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll talk soon.
Okay, bye-bye. Stay safe, everyone.